हेलो दोस्तों, स्वागत है आप सभी का हमारे चैनल इग्नो सेंटर पर। तो दोस्तों आप स्क्रीन में देख रहे होंगे कि एमएजी फर्स्ट ईयर शॉर्ट नोट्स ब्रिटिश पोइट्री एमएजी 01 एग्ज़ाम क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स। तो ये जो क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स है आपको एग्ज़ाम में बहुत हेल्पफुल करेगा और रिपीटेड क्वेश्चन से तो हम आपको ये प्रोवाइड कराने जा रहे हैं। इससे पहले हम एक रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहते हैं कि हमारा एक नया चैनल खुला है जिसका नाम है जर्नी बडी। आपको डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में उसका लिंक मिल जाएगा, वहाँ पर जाकर ज़रूर सब्सक्राइब करिएगा और हमारा जर्नी कैसा लगा वह आप अपने वर्ड्स में कमेंट में ज़रूर बताइएगा। तो दोस्तों बढ़ते हैं हमारे क्वेश्चंस की ओर। तो नंबर 1 है, नेम द 3 मेजर सोर्सेस ऑफ चौसर वोकेबलरी, हाउ डज ईच सोर्स कंट्रीब्यूट टू हिज पोएट्री। और इसका आंसर है, चौसर वॉज अ पायनर इन मैनी रेस्पेक्ट्स, शुड बी readily granted. With him is born our real poetry, say Matthew Arnold. He has been acclaimed as the first realistic, the first humorist, the first narrative artist, the first great character painter, and the first great metrical artist in English literature. Further, he has been credited not only with the fatherhood of English poetry, but has also been hailed as the father of English drama. Before the drama was born, and the father of English novel before the novel was born. And what is more, his importance is not due to precedence alone, but due to excellence. He is not only the first English poet, but a great poet in his own right. Justly he been called the fountain source of the vast stream of English literature. Contribution to language. Well, does Lowell says that Chaucer found his English a dialect and left it a language. Borrowing Saint Boris' word about the transformation which Dryden effected in English poetry, we may justly say that Chaucer found the English language brick and left it marble. When Chaucer started his literary career, the English speech and still less. The English of writing was confusingly fluid and unsettled. The English language was divided into a number of dialects which were employed in different parts of the country, the whole of them vastly more prominent than the other were: number 1, the southern; number 2, the midland; number 3, the northern or Northumbrian; number 4, the Kentist. Out of these four, the Midland or the East Midland dialects, which was spoken in London and its surrounding areas, was the simplest in grammar and syntax. Moreover, it was the one patronized by the aristocracy and literary circles of the country. Gower used this dialect for his poem Confessio Amantis and Wycliffe, for his translation of the Bible. But this dialect was not the vehicle of all literary work. Other dialects had their votaries too. Langland in his Pierce Powman, to quote an intense, used a mixture of the southern and midland dialects. Chaucer employed in his work the East Midland dialect, and by casting the enormous weight of his genius balance, decided once for all which dialect was going to be the standard literary language of the whole of the country for all times to come. None after him thought of using any dialect other than the East Midland for any literary work. of consequence. It is certain that if Chaucer had adopted some other dialect, then emergency of the standard language of literature would have been considerably delayed. All the great writers of England succeeding Chaucer are, in the words of John Spears, master of the language of which Chaucer is. Before them, the great master. Not only was Chaucer's selection of one dialect out of the four a happy one, but so was his selection of one of the three languages which were reigning supreme in England at that time: Latin, French, and English. In fact, Latin and French were more fashionable than the poor vernacular English. Latin was considered the universal language and was patronized at the expense of English by the church as well as the learned. Before Wycliffe translated it into the vulgar tongue, the Bible was read in its Latin version called the Vulgate. French was the language of the court and was used for keeping the accounts of the royal household till as late as 1365. Perplexed by the variety of languages offering themselves for use, Chaucer's friend and contemporary Gower could not decide which one of them to adopt. He wrote his Miroir d'Homme in France, Vox Clementis in Latin, and Confessio Amantis in English, perhaps because he was not quite sure which of the three languages was going to survive, but Chaucer had few doubts apathy issues. He chose English, which was a desperate language, and as the legendary king did to the beggar maid, raised her from the dust, draped her in royal robes, and conducted her coronation. That queen is ruling even now. Contribution to versification. Chaucer's contribution to English versification is no less striking than to the English language. Again, it is an instance of a happy choice. He sounded the death knell of the old Saxon literary measure and firmly established the modern one. Even in the 14th century, the old alternatives measure had been employed by such a considerable poet as Langland for his Perex Key Oman and the writer of Sir Gawain and the Journey Night. Let us give the importance feature of the old measure which Chaucer so categorically disowned. Number 1. There is no regularity in the number of syllables in each line. One line may have a few as 6 syllables and another as many as 14. Number 2. The use of alliteration as the chief ornamental device and as the lone structural principle, all the alliterative syllables are stressed. The absence 01 end rhymes and number 4. Frequent repetition to express vehemence and intensity of emotion. Chaucer had no patience with the ram roof of the alliterative measures. So does he maintain in the Parson's Tale. But trust it will, I am a southern man, I cannot Jesti rum ram rough by literary ni got what rhyme holji I but little battery. For that old-fashioned measure he substituted the regular line with end rhyme, which he borrowed from France. The new measure has the following categories characteristics. Number 1, all lines have the same number of syllables. Number 2, end rhyme. Number 3, absence of alliteration and frequent repetition. After Chaucer, no important point even thought of reverting the old measure. Thus Chaucer may be designated the father of modern English versification. Chaucer employs three principal meters in his work. In the Canterbury Tales, he mostly used line of 10 syllables each line with generally 5 accent and the line run into couplet, that is, each couplet of line has its end syllable rhyming with each other. For example, his eyes twinkle in his head a light, dawn the streets in the 40 night. Not only this, Chaucer seems to be the first Englishman who realized and brought out the lantern music of his language. To read Chaucer verse, observers or critics, is like lightning to a clear stream in a meadow full of sunshine, rippling over its beds of pebbles. The following is a tribute of a worthy successor of his, the morning star of a sun who made his music heard below. Dun Chaucer the first warble whose sweet breath preluded those melodious bursts that few the specious times of great Elizabethan with sounds that echo still. He made English a pleasant and vigorous medium of poetic utterance. His astonishingly easy mastery of the language is indeed remarkable. With one step, the writing of Chaucer carry us into a new era in which the language appear endowed with easy dignity and capaciousness of expression and clothed in the hues of the imagination. The content of poetry. Chaucer was a pioneer not only in the linguistic and prosodic fields but was one in the strict poetic field also. Not only the form of poetry but its content too is highly in depth to him. Not only did he give English poetry a new dress but a new body and a new soul. His major contribution towards the content of poetry is in his advocacy of an strict adherence to realism. His Canterbury Tales embodies a new effort in the history of literature as it strictly deals with real man, manner, and life. In the beginning of his literary career, Chaucer followed his contemporaries and immediate predecessors and wrote allegorical and dream poetry, which in its content was as remote from life as a dream is from reality. But at the age of about 50, he realized that literature should deal first-handed with life and not look at it through the spectacles of book or the hazy hues of dream and cumbersome allegory. He realized to adopt Pope's famous couplet with a little change. Known than thyself, presume not dream to scan the proper study of mankind is man, and the product of the realism was the Canterbury Tales. This poem, as it were, holds a mirror to the life of Chaucer's age and shows its manner and moral completely. Not in fragments, Chaucer replaced effectively the shadowy dilations of the old romantic and allegorical school with the vivid and pulsating pictures of contemporary life. So friends, we completed our first questions, and in next video we deals with what individualize the portraits of the character in the plot to the Canterbury Tales. So hope this video helps you to write your answers in your exams if these questions may arrive in your exam. So lastly, I want to say that if it was helpful to you, make subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to subscribe our next channel, which is in your video link, and the name of the channel is Journey Buddy. Thank you.